Devil's doorways, about sins that if we allow to come into our lives, open the doors to other sins, head us down paths that we don't need to walk down. I really believe that forewarned is forearmed. That if we're aware of the dangers that are ahead, it's a whole lot more likely that we're going to be able to deal with them and deal with them properly. Last couple of weeks ago, my sister Barb and her husband Steve came down and spent a few days with us, and Steve and I went and played a golf course up toward Little Kansas. I've never played before, a little 9-hole course down a valley, and really enjoyed it, but I'd never played it before. And I found myself consistently getting in trouble because I didn't know that if you hit it over this hill, there was a stream there, or if you hit it over here, there was a pond, because you couldn't see it. Next time I play that course, I'll be much more aware of where I don't want to hit it when I'm teeing off. Life's that way. It's really important that we know where the dangers lie that are ahead, because if we do, it's much, much easier to avoid them and not get ourselves in trouble. That's why I've wanted to talk about some of these devil's doorways, because if we're aware of where they can take us and what they can do, it's much easier to plan to avoid them or deal with them when they come. We've talked about pride. Just a minute ago, Henry made reference to the dangers of pride. And we've talked about how pride opens a devil's doorway into all kinds of things we don't like. We've talked about anger. We've talked about covetousness. And this morning I want to touch on two things that I think are very dangerous and that we really have to watch out for. And that's envy and idolatry. Now, envy, I believe, is the end result of what I'm going to call a stairway to misery. You begin that stairway with jealousy. Now, we talked before about the fact, Exodus 34:14, God will say, I am a jealous God. My name is jealous. It's okay to feel protective of and want to hold on to things that we dearly love. That's not a bad thing. But jealousy, as we all know, can turn into a green-eyed monster, can it? It can cause us to become paranoid. It can cause us to begin to distrust those we care about and so on. It can become a very ugly thing. Jealousy, I believe, opens the door to covetousness. Because if I'm jealous of what somebody has, if I'm not careful, I'm going to start coveting that. Now, covetousness is a whole different ballgame, as we've talked about, because when I start coveting something, now that means not only that I find it desirable, but I want to take it from you. And if I can take it from you, I will. That's why God warns against covetousness, because of where it leads, but it doesn't stop there. And here, I believe, is where it gets really ugly. And that is when covetousness turns into envy. I believe when you look in Scripture, one of the ugliest attitudes / emotions that we can have is envy. Because envy says, not only do I see what you have and like that, not only do I see what you have and covet that, but I hate you because you've got it. Man, I resent you. And if I could kill you to keep you from having that, or so that I could get it, in a lot of cases, that's exactly what would happen. Envy, as we're going to see and talk about, is a really ugly, ugly emotion, attitude. But it starts with jealousy, works through covetousness, and then you end up here with envy. A couple of passages that address, I believe, the danger of envy. Proverbs 14, verse 30, a tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy, listen to him, makes the bones rot. Wow. And it does. Envy will eat you up. It will destroy you. Titus 3, verse 3. Paul writes, for we ourselves were once foolish, disobedient, led astray, slaves to passions and pleasures, passing our days, listen to him, in malice and envy, hated by others, and hating one another. Because that's what envy is going to do. Envy, if you get caught up in it, is going to cause you to end up hating other people and other people hating you. That's the fruit of envy. That's one of the doors that you open when you fall into that trap. Envy opens the door to some really ugly things. One's bitterness. Now, if you bite something and taste it, and it tastes bitter, what do? You'll pucker up and you'll spit it out, won't you? Because we don't like bitter. If your life is bitter, I want you to think about how that touches everything that you experience. It taints it. It does. Because it's going to taint it with that bitterness. Several years ago, I was at a seminar, and I was visiting with some preacher friends of mine, one of whom had applied for a preaching position at a church, and he really, really wanted that position. And he didn't get hired. He didn't get it. And as we were visiting, he was saying, just going on and on about the fellow that was hired, and now he didn't deserve that job. He wasn't qualified for that job. He was living proof that it's not what you know, it's who you know, and on and on and on. And he was ranting about the eldership and all this other stuff. And took it for a while, and I just, because I love this guy, I said, man, do you realize how bitter you sound? Well, I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter. What do you mean I'm bitter? I'm not bitter, man. I'm just being realistic. There were two other guys sitting with us, and I turned to them and I said, is he bitter? Uh-huh. I said, boy, the vote's 3-1. Okay? And it forced him to stop and think, because he didn't. Here's the problem with bitterness. So often we're bitter and we don't perceive ourselves to be bitter. Okay? We may be ruining everybody's life around us with our bitterness, but we just don't perceive that we're bitter. No, I'm just being realistic. I'm just angry. It's just unjust. And we refuse to face up to it, admit that we're bitter. And again, that's a bad place to walk through life on, okay? Being bitter. Vengeful. If we're not careful, that's where envy's going to take us. It's going to take you to vengefulness. She didn't deserve that job. I'm going to do everything I can to get her fired. They should have hired me. There you go. Vengefulness. A number of years back, there was a mother of a cheerleader in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and her daughter wasn't elected to the cheer team. And she began to plot the murder of one of the girls that was on that cheer team so that her daughter could take her place. You say, you got to be kidding. No, some stuff you can't make up. You know? Why? Oh, man, envy. And here you go. You start opening doors, and they're taking you to bad places. Bitterness, vengefulness, killing over something like that. Yep, can take you there. Murder. Let me give you the ultimate example of this one. Matthew 27, 17 and 18. So when they had gathered, and they're on the pavement just outside the praetorium, and Pilate is hearing the case against Jesus, okay? So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, and this is the crowd that's gathered outside there early in the morning, whom do you want me to release for you? Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ? For he knew that it was out of what? Envy. They had delivered him up. Now, Pilate's going to fold. He's going to wash his hands. You know, he's going to duck, run. But that man knows that the charges being brought against Jesus are baseless. Pilate's no idiot. You don't serve in the position that he serves. And being ignorant, man, he's not ignorant, he's sharp. And he knows that Jesus presents no threat. But he's in this pickle. How am I going to get him set free? Well, one of the things he tries to fall back on here is this tradition of releasing somebody in celebration of Passover. And he's going, let's give Jesus an out here. Barabbas is clearly guilty. In his mind, Jesus is clearly not. Maybe they'll set Jesus free. Now, of course, they're not going to, right? But listen, one of the reasons he is so set on trying to set Jesus free is he knows that what's happened to him is trumped up charges that are brought about by envy. Think about it. Remember what Jesus said about the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees? They love the chief seats at the synagogues. They like to be addressed as rabbi. They like to be noted and in control. And here comes this upstart out of Galilee. Okay, this young man who claims to be Messiah. And what had happened 7 days before? They had a parade, didn't they, when he came into the city? I mean, he comes into the city and they're laying palm fronds down in front of him and they're shouting out, "Save now, save now, save now." I mean, he is celebrated. People adore him. And you can just see the Pharisees standing there going, "Oh, how come we don't get that kind of response?" And crowds gather around him when he preaches in the temple, and all these people are listening to him, and they can't stand it. Because you see, on top of everything else, he dares to challenge them. And here you go back to pride again, Henry. How dare they? How dare he challenge them? Jesus is murdered, brethren, out of envy. That's what envy leads to. That's why we don't need it to be a part of our hearts or our heads or our lives. Now, idolatry. Idolatry is defined literally as the worship of any object or person as a god. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 3, the first command God's going to give us what? You shall have no other gods before me. Right off the bat, what's he say? No, don't get involved in idolatry. And all the way through the law of Moses and all the way through the Old Testament, again and again and again, he is going to speak against and warn against idolatry. And there are people who say, well, you know, if God is so great and God is so good, then why does God care if people worship him or not? Because he's going to be the same God regardless. Why is he so stuck on condemning idolatry? Why's he so jealous of these false gods? I would argue that's not the case at all. He knows what idolatry leads to. And because he loves his people, he doesn't want them to get caught up in that. Jeremiah 18, 15 and 16. Listen to this lament. My people have forgotten me. They make offerings to false gods. They made them stumble in their ways, these false gods, in the ancient roads and to walk into side roads, not the highway, making their land a horror, a thing to be hissed at forever. And as I'm going to show you in a second, that's exactly what idolatry did. Idolatry tainted the land. Man, people ended up sacrificing babies on altars to their gods. That's called in Old Testament an abomination, and rightly so. And what God's saying here is, my people started following Baal, and they started following Ashtoreth, and they started following Chemosh and Dagon and Molech and all these other false gods, going down these horrible, awful paths that are destructive to the nation. That's why he opposes idolatry. Because you see, this is very important. Why is God so vehement about condemning idolatry, forbidding it? Because beliefs in false gods carry with them huge consequences. Listen, it does make a difference what you believe. This old idea that, oh, well, it doesn't make any difference what you believe as long as you believe, that is nonsense. It makes a huge difference in the quality of your life and the quality of life of those about you, what you believe. Let me give you some examples. First, in the Bible, God's vehement about forbidding idolatry because it leads to sexual immorality. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 12, He put away the male cult prostitutes out of the land and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. He's talking about during the reign of King Asa of Judah. But listen, He put away the male cult prostitutes out of the land. Where did those male cult prostitutes come from? Worship of Baal. When you celebrate sexual immorality, you sanctify sexual immorality, you make it a part of your fertility worship, okay? Then it just pervades the land and eats at it like a cancer. And that is exactly what happened when the people began to embrace some of these false worships and false gods, like the worship of Baal, for instance. Inevitably, it leads to destructive sexual immorality. It leads to self-harm. 1 Kings 18:28. Elijah in his contest with the prophets of Baal up on Mount Carmel. The prophets of Baal, they're trying to get their God to light the fire on the altar, remember? And it ain't happening. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. Clearly, what's their teaching about Baal? In part, it is we can get his attention if we'll just cut ourselves and wound ourselves and hurt ourselves. What an ugly thing. But that's what they believed. That's what they held to. They wouldn't have done that if they didn't think it might not work. I mean, they believe this stuff. Now, they're wrong, but they believe it. Self-harm. And ultimately, child sacrifice. 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 27. It's talking here about the king of Moab. Judah's come down. They're waging war against Moab. The king he's desperate, man. He's called out 700 of his soldiers. He's tried to bust through. He can't do it. Then he took his oldest son, who was to reign in his place, and offered him for a burnt offering on the wall. Go on and read. It so disgusted Israel, they turn around and go back home. And it just puts them off so bad, they just shut it down and go home. That is what idolatry leads to. That is why God says, don't do it. Because that's the kind of fruit that follows. And idolatry continues to have a hugely negative impact on people's lives today. I've been to India a couple times. I've seen the fruit of Hinduism, the fruit of a belief in karma. Karma's rooted in reincarnation. You're going to come back, you're going to come back, you're going to come back. And things are going to go better for you or worse for you based on the life that you're leading now. And so if the life you're leading now is building positive basis points karma-wise, then in the next life, things will be a little better. If they're not, then things could be worse to a whole lot worse. There's a caste system in India. That caste system, they've said it's illegal. Man, it's just as prevalent as it ever was. And it's based in karma. It's based in a belief that you find yourself where you are because that's where you deserve to be. And so, man, if you're an untouchable, you're born an untouchable, that's the lowest caste, and you live your life in the sewer chasing rats, that's what you deserve. And I have absolutely no responsibility whatsoever if I'm an upper caste, if I'm a Brahmin, to help you out in any way. Because all I'm going to do is interfere with your karma. All I'm going to do if I help you out is postpone the price that inevitably you're going to have to pay. And so if I make your life better now, then in the next life you're going to have to come back and go through it anyway. It destroys compassion. It destroys what we call agape. It results in incredible privation and suffering, and no particular move to change that or make it better. Does what you believe make a difference? Man, ask the people over there. You better believe it does. What about Islam and terrorism? What's it going to cause some young man to walk into a crowd and blow himself up, kill, and he sees the babies in the arms of mama standing right beside him. He's going to blow them all up, kill them all. And he believes that he's going to go to paradise because of what he does. Where is the positive in that? How ugly is that? That's glorified and honored. And those people are upheld as heroes for committing homicide like that. Heartless homicide. Oh, it doesn't make any difference what you believe. Oh, tell that to the families that have lost wives and children and brothers and sisters in the marketplace again and again. The thousands that have been killed by terrorism like that. That's honored by that religion. How about communism and repression? How many hundreds of millions of people had to die in the 20th century for us to find out that if you glorify the state and you make the state God, and the state as God says, it doesn't make any difference what any particular individual believes. If they don't go along with the state, we'll destroy them. And that's exactly what they do. How in the world can you say that doesn't make a difference when you watch hundreds of millions of people starve to death, be sent off to concentration camps, be murdered, slaughtered? You better believe it makes a difference what you believe. What about drug addiction? Can Coke become God? Can alcohol become God? Can you worship at the feet of all different kinds and types of drugs? People do, don't they? They do. I mean, they worship that drug because they've got to have it. And they will sell their own body. They'll betray their mom and dad. They'll rip off their brother and sister. They'll go steal from next door neighbor to get that fix, won't they? Of that oxycodone or whatever. I mean, they are worshiping at the feet of a heartless, cruel, vengeful, awful God. I'd classify gambling here. Colossians 3 verse 5. Put to death therefore what is earthly in you. Sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Every time we drive by the casino, I call it the Church of Mammon. Because that's what it is, the Church of Mammon. And I look in the parking lot to see how many are worshiping today at the Church of Mammon. Because that's exactly what's going on. I mean, what's your God? Your God is chance, your God is luck, your God is money. And you're worshiping at a place where those are what's honored, those are what's praised. And then those people get to come up here and talk to Charlie because they can't buy food for their kids because they spend it all at the casino. They can't pay their electric bill. They can't pay their gas bill. They're getting the water turned off because they spent all of their money at the casino, worshiping at the feet of a cold, cruel God. Luck, chance, money. It makes a difference what you believe. It makes a difference who you worship. It makes a big difference in people's lives. I see the consequences of it all the time. And we better be dead serious about who we worship and why we worship the one that we do. Because the consequences in this society are heartbreaking when you look at them. And worldwide, they're heartbreaking. Now, Paul Harvey used to say something like, wash out your minds with this. And there's some doorways that lead to beautiful things too. And over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about some of these beautiful things. Because there are also doorways that open to just wonderful, incredible blessings. And those are the doors we need to be focusing on. Those are the doors that we need to be opening. Galatians 5, 22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, agape, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Listen to him. Against such things there is no law. There is no law. Why? Because, what a difference there would be in this world if people were stepping through those doors. If those were the doors that people were wanting to push open, those were the pathways that people were wanting to follow, this world would be a beautiful, much better place. And those are the doors that we need to be stepping through. And so we're going to look next at those doors. As a child of God, all of us are going to be tempted to step through the devil's doorways. He's going to paint them up, man. He's going to put neon around them. He's going to make them look attractive. He's going to let the world tell you, oh, you step through this door, it ain't going to hurt you. You're going to have a great time. And heartbreakingly, so many people step through those doors and they find out, what's on the other side is ugly and leads to uglier. At the same time, if we'll step through one of these doors, what we're going to find is not only something beautiful, but the opportunity for even more beautiful things. You're going to choose the doors, brothers and sisters. I choose my doors, you choose your doors. We need to make wise choices in our lives because those choices have real consequences. If you're choosing this morning to give your life to the Lord, you're ready to do that. To confess that Jesus is the Son of God, to put on your Lord in baptism, become a part of the family of God. You're ready to step through a doorway that's going to lead to some beautiful things. If we can help you in any way, won't you come while we stand and while we sing? It is time for us to begin class in here. Appreciate the fellowship, but we need to get underway. Open your Bibles, if you would, to Proverbs chapter 20, and we'll be looking at verse 29. To again introduce this class, what we've been doing is I've likened it to opal mining. You know, you just dig and dig and dig, and you find different gems as you go, and everything in here is valuable. But some of them are just a little prettier and strike you a little more than others. And that's the way it is with kind of what I'm doing. And so the choice of some of these passages is pretty arbitrary. But these are ones that I find of value, find of help, that challenge and strengthen me. In Proverbs 20, verse 29, first of all, the glory of young men is their strength, but the splendor of old men is their gray hair. I really do think that it's very important that we understand and honor what Solomon will talk about when he's writing in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 about the seasons of life. You know, he talks about how to everything there is a season. I'm afraid too often we run through certain seasons. We waste the enjoyment of other seasons. We don't necessarily savor them as we should. And as he says here, you know, is there a time when you're young and full of energy and you're ready to go and you're going to tackle the world and whip everything? And I mean, that's beautiful. That's a neat thing. And then there comes a time when everything hurts. And if you would, just for a second, because I think this is helpful. Flip over to Ecclesiastes, please, for just a second. And turn to chapter 12, the last chapter in Ecclesiastes. And I want you to listen to Solomon describing getting older. And I love the way he does that, the analogies that he draws, the pictures that he uses. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. And I want to say right off, okay, one thing about it, we are so blessed. Way more than Solomon was. Because as we get older, we have all kinds of things to help us mitigate the effects of aging. They didn't have those. If you lost your sight, your eyesight began to go, you couldn't go get a pair of glasses. You couldn't get a set of hearing aids. If you broke your hip, there was no hip surgery. If your shoulder went bad, they couldn't fix it. You couldn't go buy Blue Emu or whatever for what hurts and rub it on, because they may have had a few primitive lotions and unguents and things of that nature, but nothing like what we enjoy today. We can so mitigate the effects of aging in wonderful ways compared to what was probably the richest man on the face of the earth at that time couldn't buy because it wasn't available. So we're really blessed. But listen to him. Verse 2, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. We've talked before about the fact, yeah, your eyesight, you can still see 20/20 if there's enough light. But my daddy warned me, and he was absolutely right. Son, there's going to come a time when you need more light in order to be able to see. You know, I go looking behind the bookcase now where we've got all the cords for our TV and everything back there. They're laughing. And I've got to get back there with a lamp in order to see, because I can't see in the dark like I used to. Now, my optometrist just told me, he's corrected me to 20/20. Yeah, there's plenty of light in here. I can see 20/20. But when I get in a situation where it's dark, it's much more difficult to see than what it used to be. That's exactly what he's talking about here. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble, you get the shakes a little bit, and the strong men are bent. Stuff hurts and it's harder and harder to straighten up. And the grinders cease because they're few. I love that one. Your teeth fall out. You can't eat, chew like you used to. And here we go again with, look at the blessings we have now with dentures and implants and all that kind of stuff that they didn't have. Those who look through the windows are dimmed, just can't see it clearly or see as far. And the doors on the street are shut when the sound of the grinding is low. Can't hear like you used to. And yet one rises up at the sound of a bird. You also don't sleep like you used to sleep. Much more lightly. And on it goes. But what's he talking about? He's talking about there are seasons in life. And there are. And we need to honor those seasons. Being young is wonderful. I don't want to do it again. Being older is wonderful. I don't know I want to do it again either. I look forward to going to be with the Lord if and when that comes. But enjoy the season. Enjoy the blessings that are associated with the season. And that holds true when it comes to you as an individual, when it comes true of you as a family. You know, if you've got young children and all that, you've got a responsibility to those babies. You've got a responsibility to take care of them and watch out for them. And man, anybody who's grandma and grandpa will tell you, you know, if you've got to keep those little ones more than 3 or 4 days, you're going to have treatment afterwards, aren't you? Because you are absolutely worn to a frazzle. And I look at how young mothers, I think about Carol under the age of 4, and how she did it. And she did it, and many of you did it, and you survived, and here you are. But try it now. You know, I mean, wow. So, there are good things to be found in every phase of life, and I really believe that, and we need to enjoy and celebrate each of those phases. Down to 21:3. To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Over and over again, read Isaiah, for instance, and what he's going to say is, listen, don't come into my temple, don't come in and bring your sacrifices and think that in and of itself is going to please me. What pleases me is you living a righteous life. That's what pleases me. What people often fail to recognize or understand is when you go back and read, for instance, in Leviticus, and you look at the law in regard to sacrifices, that most of those sacrifices, whether you're talking about guilt offering or sin offering, the vast majority of the burnt offerings, trespass offering, with the exception of the peace offering, all those offerings are recognition of failure, not success. You're bringing those sacrifices to God as a recognition of your failure to do His will. It is a physical kind of confession. I fouled up. I violated your will. I let you down. Here's this bull. Here's this goat. Here's this sheep. Here's this grain. And it is an acknowledgement of failure, not success. God doesn't celebrate your failures. And I think a lot of people, they look at the Old Testament, they look at all these sacrifices, and they go, well, God must have been pleased with... No. He wasn't pleased with those offerings. Because those offerings were a recognition of failure to do His will, of rebellion against Him. He says, if you really want to do righteousness, if you want to be acceptable to the Lord, do righteousness and justice. Just do my will. That's what I really want. It's wonderful, isn't it, when somebody hurts you and they apologize? Wouldn't it have been nicer if they just didn't hurt you in the first place? And that's what God's saying here, or Solomon is saying here. That really what God's looking at in your life and mine is our desire to please Him, our desire to do His will. No, we're not going to do it perfectly. Okay, we're not. Jeremiah will say all our righteousness is like filthy rags. It is, okay? Everything we do is tainted by selfishness. It is. But if we're seeking to honor Him and we're seeking to do His will, then we are pointing our lives in the right direction and pointing our hearts in the right direction. And as Henry talked about this morning, and every time we eat the Lord's Supper, it is ultimately what? A recognition of our failure, isn't it? We eat it because He had to die. He had to die why? Because I killed Him. Bottom line, I killed Him. And we don't often think of it that way, but in reality, Dan killed Jesus. Because Jesus had to die on the cross because of Dan's sins. And so in a very real sense, each of us killed Him. And that's not something to celebrate, I don't think. Celebrate His love. Celebrate His willingness to give Himself. But I don't feel at all good about celebrating my failure. But what I am doing is recognizing my tremendous need for Him. And Him doing for me what I could not and cannot do for myself. And that's atone for my sins. And so, again, what pleases Him? Righteousness and justice. Now, verse 9, and then we'll drop down to verse 19. Tie those two together. It is better to live in a corner of the housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. Verse 19. It is better to live in a desert land than with a quarrelsome and fretful woman. And we talked a little bit about this last week because this is a theme that Solomon hit again and again. But man, this is so important. Listen, if you've made covenant with this person, you've made covenant with that man, you've made covenant with that woman, you've agreed that you two are husband and wife. and you have honored that with the piece of paper that we call a marriage certificate or marriage license, and you have stood before friends and loved ones and said, we make covenant with each other, why in the world would you not seek to make that just as good as you possibly can? Why would you settle for anything less than that? I don't get it. I don't understand. Now, is it work to do that? Yes, it is. Do we always see eye to eye? Do we always get along? No, we don't. But can it be one of the best things in the world? Yes, it absolutely can. And it should. And that means that it's incredibly important that we put the effort into our relationships with our mates that they deserve. Again, if you're going to be with somebody for 40 or 50 or 60 years, wouldn't it be nice to like them? Man, I've counseled with couples, and they didn't like each other. Seriously, they did not like each other. I mean, they did not like each other. I can't emphasize that enough. And they've been married for 25 years of absolute, utter misery. What a shame. What a shame. And it doesn't have to be that way. Again, so much of the beauty of life is found in relationships. It's found in your relationship with your wife, with your husband, with your family, with your friends. I mean, that's where you get to savor life and enjoy life. That's what makes life worth living. Stuff, you get bored with stuff, stuff wears out, you got to tend to stuff. Stuff ultimately doesn't fulfill, it frustrates. I firmly believe that. Can't take it with you. But relationships you can, okay? I am very glad that I look forward to going home, because I know people that don't. Oh, man, here we go. I can't find any other excuse to stay away, so I guess I've got to go home. What a shame. What an awful thing. It doesn't have to be that way. And so, again, well, but it's so much work, it's so hard, it's so difficult. You just don't understand how ridiculous he is or how hard she is to get along with. I didn't marry him. I didn't marry her, you did. Okay? Now, is it worth a tough year? A tough year where you got to work through all kinds of stuff to have 30 good years afterwards? I would say yeah. Yeah, it is. It may not be any fun at the time, but ultimately it pays big dividends. Relationships, again, matter. And what Solomon says here, and he's absolutely right, why make such a significant part of your life so miserable if you can change that by investing some of yourself in that? (22:1). A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold. People tend to look at success in terms of accumulation, don't they? In terms of money, land, companies, power, that kind of thing. But I think what he says here is absolutely right. A good name is worth more than any of that. Favor is better than silver or gold. I don't mean to embarrass anybody, but I'm going to embarrass probably a couple of people. I spoke at Crosstown Wednesday night in Tulsa, and after service, this young man came up to me and he said, I assume that you know the Walker family. I said, I certainly do. And he made reference to Jerry Walker and what a fine man Jerry Walker was. And that made me very proud, because Jerry Walker is part of the family here, but there are people in Tulsa, Oklahoma talking about what a fine man Jerry Walker is. Cool thing. Can't buy that, folks. You can't buy that. You earn that, don't you? I had somebody say the other day, I can't go visit anywhere, but what somebody's going to say, oh, that's where old Bud O'Perry lives, isn't it? Everybody knows Bud O'Perry. And I've been to a lot of places where people know Bud O'Perry. And whenever they speak of Bud O'Perry, they speak of Bud O'Perry with a smile on their faces. Because Bud O'Perry's a good man. And Bud O'Perry has a good reputation. And you can't buy that with money. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. I lost the guy's name, and I had it before, and it's not age, it's just infirmity. But who was the old boy that ran the Ponzi scheme and ripped? Madoff. Yeah, Madoff, he made off with a lot of money. Yeah, Madoff. My understanding is that some of his kinfolk changed their name because the Madoff name was so tainted by what he had done that they decided they'd change their name. I don't blame them. I have never known anybody named Hitler. I'm not saying there aren't. Have you ever, anybody here known somebody whose last name was Hitler? No? You know, there are some names, man, we just, nope. We don't want that name. It's like we've talked about with Jezebel. You know, I've never known a couple to name their daughter Jezebel. Like I said, I named our cow Jezebel, but you don't name people Jezebel. There are certain names that just carry with them very negative connotations. They do. And they're deserved. And consequently, people steer clear of those names. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold. When we left Portales, we've been there 16 years. When we left Portales, they had a going away thing for us. And one of my elders came up and he said something to me that I've never forgotten. And it kind of took me back at the moment, but processing it, here's what he said. He said, Dan, I want you to know that in 16 years you never embarrassed us. And when he first said that, I didn't quite know how to take it. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought he complimented me. You never embarrassed us. How many people, how many preachers have embarrassed their congregation? How many elders have embarrassed their congregation? How many deacons have embarrassed their congregation by things they said, things they did, the way they acted? You never embarrassed us. Like I said, I had to process that one for a while, but I'm proud he said it now, I guess. Good character, being thought of with favor, is not accidental. It's something that's earned, isn't it? And you can wreck it just like that. You know, one of the things that is heartbreaking to me is, for instance, with David. David was a great king. David was an incredible intellectual. He was an amazing poet. He was a great warrior. He was a great administrator. I mean, for a kid raising sheep, what that man did is absolutely amazing. The guy was incredible. And you're never going to hear about David without hearing about Bathsheba. And you're never going to hear about David without hearing about the stumble that he made and the mess that he caused. Always there's going to be the asterisk after his name, isn't there? Always. And that's the way it is with life. You can do it right and 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 do it right. And all you have to do is do it wrong once, and what? There's going to be an asterisk up there, isn't it? He was a really good man, but. She was a really fine woman, but. And here you go. That good name is such an incredibly valuable thing. You know, I say Joe Young, or I say Marie Branscombe, and I mean, people are going to say, wow, two fine, godly Christian women. What a legacy they left behind. What an example that they set. That's what an amazing thing to leave. Okay, what an amazing accomplish. And no asterisk either. Boy, I mean, just that's the way it is. Okay, verse 6, one that's generated a lot of controversy and discussion and everything else through the years. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he's old, he will not depart from it. One of the responsibilities that we have is to point our kids in the right direction. I've talked about this several times. One of the greatest gifts that you can give your children or your grandchildren is to socialize them in such a way that they function in life, that they get along with other people, that they know how to cooperate and work with others. Because if you don't do that, and you raise or allow Beelzebub to continue down the path that Beelzebub wants to continue down, you're going to end up with a disaster on your hands. That's inevitable. If we, I'm sure you've all seen studies one night. Do you realize if you haven't socialized your child by the time they're 4, if your little boy isn't able to play with other little boys by the time he's 4, if your little girl isn't able to play with little girls by the time they're 4, if they can't begin to get along and socialize and function in a group, and they've learned, now I'm not saying by any means that they're mature, but they're beginning to figure out how to get along with others. If you haven't got them there by the time they're 4, you've probably got a real problem on your hands. Because by the time they're 14, they're going to be fighting at school, and they're going to be kicked out of school, and they're going to be having all kinds of problems because they can't get along with other people. And as we've talked about, you ask a teacher, do you enjoy having Johnny in your class when Johnny does nothing but cause problems? No. Because I spend all my time with Johnny and I don't have time to teach the other kids, and I don't like that at all. I resent that. Okay, so Johnny's not getting any support from that teacher. Parents, are you tickled that every time you turn around, somebody's calling you and complaining about the way Johnny's acting? Police and others are constantly contacting you about that. No. Coaches, do any coaches want a kid like Johnny on their team who's causing nothing but trouble and stirring up other people and doesn't want to cooperate, doesn't respect authority figures? No. You see what we're doing. If we don't socialize our children, if we don't teach them to respect others, if we don't teach them borders, if we don't teach them consequences, if we don't teach them values and teach them early and teach them well, we're condemning them to a life of isolation. We're condemning them to be cut off from other people. We're condemning them to a dysfunctional form of life. And I hear this, well, we don't want to interfere with Johnny's psyche. We want Johnny to be able to express himself and all this kind of stuff. There's some stuff that Johnny doesn't need to express. There's some stuff that Johnny needs to learn. No, you don't do that. Okay? No. You don't take your toy and whack Billy over the head because you're mad at Billy. That's unacceptable. You don't do that. And stuff like that, it's incredibly important that that be shared and that be taught. And in the process of that, you're giving that child a foundation that they can come back to, a foundation that they can fall back on. Giving a child that set of values and all is incredibly important because, yeah, they may go wander off and they may do all kinds of things, but at least they've got something to come back to, something to build off of. They know what's right. Unfortunately, today in our culture, we've got so many kids, they don't know what's right. Nobody's ever bothered to teach them. They don't know. That's the ones that are really in trouble. Because they've got no foundation to fall back on. They have no sense of normal. Because they don't know what abnormal is the only normal they know. And so one of the greatest gifts you can give your child, is just to teach them the basics. Again, you respect your mom and dad, you respect your elders, you respect police, you respect teachers, you respect people in position of authority. You respect them. They deserve it and you respect them. And you treat them accordingly. You set boundaries for your kids. You don't let them stay out till 3 o'clock in the morning when they're 12 years old. That kid who was shot in an alley in Chicago who was 12, I don't blame that policeman a bit. I blame that kid's parents. There is no way in the world a 12-year-old ought to be out at 3 in the morning. That is absolutely ridiculous. It should not be. And that's the kind of thing that's causing so many problems in our country. It's not delinquent kids, it's delinquent parents. We need to give them boundaries. We need to teach them you face consequences. Man, you make a stupid decision, you pay the price. You make a good decision, you get rewarded. That's the way life is. And if we shelter our kids from consequences, then they'll never learn that if you make a stupid mistake, you're going to pay a price. And you will. And values and faith, man, there's no substitute for that. Because that's a foundation you're going to build your life on. We're out of time. Let's pray. Father, thank you for loving us. Thank you for caring for us. Thank you for blessing us with wisdom literature. And God, help us to hear, please. Help us to really listen to what you have to say to us and not just blow it off, but really pay attention to the wisdom that you teach, because your ways are wise, your ways work. And Father, in this country, we desperately need wisdom, and we desperately need guidance, and we desperately need order and structure. And your word provides all of that and so much more. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for providing for us as you do. Help us, Father, to be good stewards of the blessings that you give to us. And we pray that our worship of you today and our praise of you today has brought you glory and made you proud. We offer this in Jesus' name. Amen.